Although I wouldn't consider it one of the best videos I've ever done, especially when you compare it to the surrounding amazing Venomized circus, My Western Academia was still a really cool idea suggested by Galahound19, and with the new season of the anime coming out like a few days ago, I figured it'd be cool to give it another shot. So, let's check in on Sheriff Blackwhip and see what's going down in the Wild West. Let's create some chaos! After the mutual defeat of Sheriff Almighty and One Gun Shigaraki, the town of Mustar returned to being a quiet, small town under the watch of a new sheriff, Sheriff Blackwhip. The new sheriff acted as a hero, not only to Mustar, but to its neighboring towns as well, aiding other sheriffs whenever a problem rose that was too big for just one person to handle. Skilled with not only a pistol and a whip, but in hand-to-hand combat as well, Sheriff Blackwhip was becoming the most famous sheriff in the West, but little did he know, he would soon face an opponent that would challenge both his skills and his resolve. A wealthy southern gentleman rode into town with his sidekick. The man, only known as Southern Gentle, was a wealthy landowner, but that was about it. No one really knew who Southern Gentle was despite his fortune, a fact that bothered him very much. Gentle longed for fame and recognition. He wished for his actions to make a mark on history, as, deep down, he was constantly worried about fading into obscurity. Southern Gentle first tried to gain the recognition he craved by training to be a sheriff. However, despite his intellect and proficiency with his weapons, his lack of insight into most situations around him led him to cause more problems than he solved. As a result, Gentle instead tried his hand at being an outlaw, though not the kind that most people would expect. Gentle and his sidekick, Abi Minami, would go from town to town, drawing as much attention to themselves as possible before committing their crime. They would scream and threaten people with their faces uncovered for everyone to see. Whether it be a robbery or a kidnapping, Gentle would give an elaborate, theatrical speech about achieving one's dreams in hopes of inspiring others. While he was giving his speech, though, someone in the town would go and gather up the sheriff or law enforcement, and Gentle and Abby would be arrested before they even committed their crime. Since they didn't technically break any laws, other than being a disturbance, Gentle and Abby were often let go and usually kicked out of town before they moved on to the next one and repeated the process once more. They did this town after town with more or less the same results of being arrested and banished. That is, until they made their way into Mustar, where Sheriff Blackwhip was waiting for them. Through his travels of helping out the sheriffs in different towns, he caught wind of Southern Gentle and Abby and their actions. He knew it was only a matter of time before the two of them came into his town, and he wasn't going to let them disrupt the peace he vowed to keep. The two of them strolled into Mustar and were immediately met by Sheriff Blackwhip staring them down. Gentle dismounted and was about to jump right into his speech, despite the lack of audience, when the sheriff held up his hand to quiet him. He told them to leave this town or he would arrest them both, for good. He reached for his belt and pulled out his gun in one hand and his whip in the other. Unfortunately for him, Gentle didn't take too kindly to the threat, and pulled out a revolver and a knife of his own. Sheriff Blackwhip attacked Gentle with his whip, believing that this was more of Gentle's showboating and it would be a quick fight. Instead, Gentle dodged the attack with incredible agility, like Sheriff Blackwhip was momentarily taken aback. He realized that he had severely underestimated Southern Gentle as an opponent. If he was going to keep the peace in Mustar, he was going to have to give it his all. The two men fired a volley of bullets at each other. However, due to them having to be on the offensive and defensive simultaneously, their shots weren't very accurate. Each time one of them tried to take aim at their opponent, they would hear the sound of gunfire and take cover. Eventually, the sheriff managed to wrap his whip around Gentle's legs and pull him to the ground. He pulled the lasso, reeling Gentle closer to him. Now, it was the sheriff's turn to showboat. He put a foot on Gentle's back, pointed a gun at him, and told him to surrender, or pay the price. Gentle's response was just another instance of Sheriff Blackwhip underestimating the man. He picked his face out of the dirt and turned to look at the sheriff. He said he wasn't so simple-minded to just give up when someone told him to. That as a sheriff, Blackwhip should understand his dream better than anyone. Gentle finished by asking Blackwhip what was the reason for his becoming a sheriff was. The sheriff's foot eased slightly off of Gentle's back as he looked into the sunset and thought. When Sheriff Blackwhip was a kid, he was physically weaker than average, as his bones were less dense than they should have been. Despite his dreams, it was almost set in stone that he wouldn't be able to do any kind of physical labor, let alone be a sheriff. Due to his physical state, many of the other kids made fun of him and called him useless. One of these kids was Barry Key. When they were young, Barry and Blackwhip were friends, but as they grew older and Barry began helping his father with demolition work, Barry began treating the other boy almost like an anchor holding him down. Still, the two grew up alongside each other, Barry learning his father's demolition trade in hopes of taking charge one day, and Blackwhip still working against his disadvantage to become a sheriff. Since he couldn't physically train to be stronger, he would often study the sheriffs of different towns, taking notes on the laws of each town and the ways that each sheriff enforced them to ensure peace. While he researched every sheriff thoroughly, his favorite by far was the Almighty, the sheriff of Moostar. Living in Moostar, young Blackwhip witnessed firsthand the heroic acts of the Almighty. He was a symbol of peace to the people of Moostar and the boy's main inspiration to become a sheriff, no matter what. On the other hand, Barry was quite adamant about reminding Blackwhip of his weakness. He would make fun of Blackwhip in front of the other kids in Moostar and, on a few occasions, steal Blackwhip's notes and blow them up while he was working on demolition. The two's dynamic went unchanging for years. Blackwhip continued idolizing the town sheriff, while Barry kept trying to snap him out of what he believed was a delusional fantasy. That was until one day, when walking around town, Barry was ambushed by outlaws. They restrained him so he couldn't reach for a stick of dynamite to try and scare them off. They beat him and demanded he hand over any gold he had on him, but wouldn't accept it when he said he had none. It just so happened that the young Blackwhip was walking through the same area and spotted Barry being attacked. In that moment, all the years of torment that Blackwhip had to endure were simply forgotten. The only thing Blackwhip saw was someone in need of help. He screamed at the outlaws to stop as he rushed over to the group. Unfortunately, he didn't get too far. As soon as he was in range, one of the outlaws smacked him across the face and sent him sprawling into the dirt. However, he did manage to accomplish turning the outlaws' attention away from Barry. But that meant they were now focused on him. Young Blackwhip tried to stand, his lip bleeding from the initial hit. But one of the outlaws kicked him in the stomach and knocked him down again. After every hit, the boy would try to get up and continue to fight, only for him to be knocked down once more. Every inch of his body hurt, and he was bleeding in several places. Eventually, he lacked the strength to get up. Instead, he curled up into a ball as his vision slowly faded to black. The boy's eyes slowly opened and then shut again as they took in the full brightness of the sun. His yellow-tinted eyelids faded away as a figure loomed over him. He believed it was one of the outlaws ready to deal the final blow, but he risked a peek anyway. The figure standing over him was much bigger than any of the outlaws had been, and since he was blocking the sun, was masked in enough shadow so the boy couldn't make out who it was. Yet, once the figure spoke, young Blackwhip knew without a doubt who it was and what had happened. Sometime after he blacked out from the pain, the almighty sheriff stepped in and beat the outlaws, rescuing the boy, as Barry took off as soon as the outlaws' attentions were turned away from him. The sheriff said that he had heard about the ambush on Barry and rushed over to stop it, only for the boy to reach them first. As he was headed toward the scene, he saw Blackwhip try to save his colleague, disregarding any harm that might come to himself. He told the boy that, although he should be careful about being so reckless, what he did was a true act of bravery and heroism. Young Blackwhip nearly burst into tears hearing those words. He thanked the sheriff for not only saving him, but for the encouragement as well. Then he asked the one question he needed to know the answer to, no matter how terrified he was of the outcome. "Can I become a sheriff like you?" The Almighty knelt down to the boy's eye level, looked him in the face, and spoke honestly. "No." Blackwhip stood frozen, his mind still trying to process if he heard the sheriff correctly. Was it really not possible? Was all his time studying laws and dreaming about bringing peace to his town all just a waste of time? Why would the sheriff call him heroic if he knew Black Whip could never amount to anything more? But the sheriff wasn't done answering. Not in your current state. The boy snapped back to reality as the sheriff continued. He told him that there was a place that could help him not only remedy his issue with his bone density, but also train him with a variety of tools and weapons that would better aid him in combat. Black Whip was ecstatic and immediately asked where this place was and how soon he could go. Together, he and the sheriff made the long journey through the desert until they arrived at a seemingly abandoned town. Once there, Black Whip met a stoic man named Aizawa, who the sheriff said would be teaching the boy alongside others before leaving Black Whip and Aizawa to return to Mustar. For many months, Aizawa had Black Whip working with others to keep the town functioning, while also keeping him on a strict diet that would help improve his bone density. The boys soon learned that everyone in the town had tests that didn't play to their strengths, but rather their weaknesses. One of these people was a girl named Mina, who was absent-minded and often forgot to protect herself from the outside elements, resulting in a sunburn that turned her skin a pinkish red. She was tasked with walking long distances across the town to fetch water, worsening her sunburn unless she remembered to wear a hat and cover her arms. Black Whip had a similar task, albeit for a different reason. For the first few months, Aizawa had Black Whip carrying boxes of food and supplies to different buildings across town. At first, Black Whip couldn't lift much, instead opting to carry less at a faster rate to increase his agility. He was able to carry more and more weight while still keeping the same speed, until his bones were not as dense and strong as the average person's, but stronger. Finally, it came time for Aizawa to teach Black Whip how to use a gun and a whip. Black Whip picked up on the weapons training fairly easily, using a mix of techniques from his study notes on other sheriffs and his own ideas. He trained night and day to master both weapons while simultaneously continuing to deliver supplies around town to increase his strength and agility. It wasn't long before Aizawa approached Black Whip, now a grown adult, and told him that there was nothing more that he could learn there. Around the same time, word had spread about the kidnapping attempt by the League of Outlaws and the death of both One Gun Shigaraki and the Almighty. Upon hearing the news, Black Whip headed back to Mustar to pay his respects to his idol, the one who pointed him in the direction that pushed him closer to his dream. Sheriff Black Whip came out of his daze and took his foot completely off of Gentle's back and reached out a hand to help him up. He realized that Gentle wasn't a bad person. He wanted to do good, but he wasn't given the same opportunities that Black Whip was. It forced Black Whip to wonder if he would have turned out the same way had the Almighty not told him about Aizawa in the town. But now, the Almighty was gone, and it was up to him to help point this misguided man down the right path towards his true dream. Woo! Now I gotta say, even though the art was a bit of a hit... even though the art was a bit of a hit or miss with the character designs, I still think this turned out really good in terms of background work and lighting. I think alongside Murder Drones as Dragons, this might have been some of my best background work, especially Gentle. Not to mention that the story was really fun to write. Overall, I think it turned out really good, and I hope you enjoyed the video too. And if you did enjoy the video, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button. And if you want more of this content, I don't actually know if I have any other anime videos on the channel, but if I do, here's a list of them. And if not, here's something else. But that's all I've got for you today. My name is KyngPin Creations, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.